Thanks for clicking. We had another big week in China's real estate crisis this week as Evergrande failed to deliver its much anticipated $300 billion restructuring plan. Instead, the developer offered a number of preliminary restructuring principles.
You trust banks?
With the promise to provide a full restructuring plan by the end of 2022. This was definitely not good news for China's real estate market, as we also received word this week that Chinese home sales had plummeted 40% in the month of July in the wake of China's widening mortgage boycott. The continued mortgage boycotts in China are raising concerns for China's $56 trillion banking system, which was already under major pressure stemming from the continued and sustained real estate defaults. Given that concerns about China's economic recovery in the wake of their zero-COVID policies are already growing, plummeting real estate sales are not exactly a good sign. So what I want to do today is go over Evergrande, take a look at these continual mortgage boycotts and their effects on the banking system and the housing sector as a whole, and then we'll take a look at what to look for next. Well, U.S. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan dominated all China headlines this week. As we'll see, the real estate crisis continued to heat up and is showing no signs of slowing down. We'll continue to have updates out on China's real estate crisis on Evergrande and on its overall economy every Friday on this channel. If you want to get those updates, make sure you click, like, and subscribe. But for now, let's get into Evergrande. As mentioned, after officially defaulting on their debt, Evergrande was given 6 months to come up with a restructuring plan to repay investors on its $300 billion worth of debt. However, Evergrande failed to submit that plan on time last week, frustrating already wary creditors who have been more than patient with Evergrande's ongoing debt issues. For its part, in its filing to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, Evergrande promised that it would formalize a plan to repay its offshore investors by the end of 2022.
You want me to get the money, don't you?
And hinted that it might be willing to trade shares in its EV and property management subsidiaries as sweeteners for restructuring the debt. At this point, there is a real concern on the part of investors and creditors that Evergrande will fail to repay any of these debts. And as such, Beijing is expected to get their arms wrapped around this and oversee the restructuring as the Communist Party state switches its focus to the completion of homes in the face of the spreading mortgage boycotts. Indeed, the mortgage boycotts that started about 4 weeks ago have showed no signs of slowing down. As we discussed last week, Beijing has begun to censor any release of information on the number of boycotts. But the latest tally, the boycotts involve hundreds of thousands of buyers across 300 projects. With the boycotts continuing to escalate, the big question is to what extent these boycotts will put pressure on China's banking system, with the S&P projecting that it could affect 6.4% of all mortgages in China, and with Deutsche Bank going even further and saying that it could affect upwards of 7% of all mortgages in China.
So this is the big concern here. Well, the offshore bondholders who haven't been paid, they're worried about getting paid, but the broader implications are to contagion and financial risk to the bedrock of the Chinese economy. It's the banking system as well as the property sector.
Jiwu Chen, I probably butchered that, professor at the Hong Kong University of Business, said that banks are currently caught between a rock and a hard place. If they don't help the developers finish the projects, they would end up losing much more. If they do, that of course would make the government happy, but they add more to their exposure to delayed real estate projects. Yeah, as we've seen with Evergrande, Kaija, Shimao, Country Garden, all these developers throughout this year that were considered safe and have run into problems with paying their bills, the banks are not necessarily willing to continue to add to their exposure in these failing real estate developers. On the other hand, if they don't lend the money and these projects go unfinished, we could see a real problem with the banking system as these mortgage boycotts continue. As Beijing thus far has sat somewhat on the sidelines,
Is that the issue?
these mortgage boycotts could cause real damage to this relatively large banking system in China. And as a result of Evergrande failing to submit their restructuring program and news of the 40% drop in sales in China, combined with the continuing escalation of China's mortgage boycotts, the real estate developers saw their shares fall to their lowest point since March of this year. Back when China was under lockdown, when large portions were under the zero COVID lockdowns, the stocks have fallen to that point. We've been covering China's real estate crisis on this channel for almost a year now, and what started with Evergrande potentially defaulting on their debt has moved to a large portion of the rest of China's real estate developers We've seen massive drops in sales, and now we're seeing major boycotts all across the country, which is making its way into the banks. So this crisis doesn't show any signs of abating anytime soon, and we'll obviously continue to have updates out on it on this channel every Friday. If you want to get those updates, make sure you click, like, and subscribe. But for now, thanks so much for watching.